This hearing will come to order. I want to first welcome our witnesses. Appreciate your testimony, which I have thoroughly read and studied. The hearing is really called to take a look at, a one-year look back, the humanitarian crisis that we experienced last year as unaccompanied children streamed across our border in record numbers. The flow has been reduced, but I would still say it's at almost humanitarian crisis levels. And rather than read an opening statement, I'll ask for unanimous consent to enter my written statement into the record. I would like to concentrate on a piece of Mr. Greenberg's testimony. I want to read a little bit of it as soon as I find it. Mr. Greenberg, in his written testimony, says, in recent years, the number of unaccompanied children referred to HHS's Unaccompanied Children Program each year was generally in the range of 6,000 to 7,000 until fiscal year 2012. Those numbers increased from 2012 through 2014 from 13,625 in fiscal year 2012 to 24,668 in fiscal year 2013 to 57,496 in fiscal year 2014. He goes on to say, as I will discuss later, the number has fallen considerably in the last year, though it is still high relative to caseloads prior to FY 2012. Now, we've presented this chart a number of times that graphically depicts the dramatic increase in the unaccompanied children coming in primarily from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And I do this from a standpoint of trying to lay out pictorially when did it all occur and what happened. And there's one dramatic event that occurred in 2012. It's called Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals that was implemented by this administration that I know there's an awful lot of stated denial from, saying that, oh, that didn't really cause this. It's a push factor. It's, there's multiple factors. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's really quite clear that unilateral executive action on deferred action on childhood arrivals was the primary cause for this surge. And what I want this hearing today to talk about is the incentives we create in this country, in our laws, for people to come into this country illegally. We are a nation of immigrants. We need to recognize the fact that people that come into this country, by and large, are coming for the exact same reason our ancestors came here. They're seeking the opportunity that this country offers people. We need to understand that. We need to a certain extent, respect that if it's done legally. We cannot tolerate an uncontrolled border, an unsecure border, and an immigration process that's out of control that is all based on illegal immigration. So we have to really take a look at our laws and take a look at those incentives for illegal immigration. Again, I would, certainly look at deferred action on childhood arrivals as one of those incentives that created this crisis. So that's, from my standpoint, what I want to glean from this hearing today in the testimony and the questions we'll be asking. But it's a serious issue. People's lives are put at risk because of these incentives, and we need to get to the bottom of this. The other point I want to make is the difficulty in getting the information to actually solve this problem. Part of the problem there is we have 3 different departments with 5 different component agencies dealing with this, and these children are passed from one department and agency to the other, and we don't keep a real flowing record, and each agency is charged with a certain responsibility in the process, and there's just no overall coordination of everybody's effort. And from my standpoint, I don't believe we're really truly enforcing the laws the way that they were meant to. And as a result, we continue to incentivize this kind of illegal immigration. That's got to stop. So with that, I'll turn it over to our ranking member, Senator Carper. Let me start with the chart. As I stated earlier, there are multiple causes for, obviously, children coming into this country, but does anybody want to take a look at that chart and basically dispute my overall conclusion of what the primary cause of the spike of unaccompanied children coming to this country was deferred action on childhood arrivals, the message that sent into Central America that if you get to America, you're pretty well home free. I mean, Anybody want to volunteer a challenge to that conclusion? Okay, well, then I'll, Mr. Greenberg, you twitched.
First, I do want to make clear that HHS is not an immigration agency, is not responsible for immigration policy, and as indicated, our responsibilities here are principally about providing the shelter for the children and getting them to appropriate sponsors. So the work on reasons for why children are coming is really principally the work that has been done by the State Department and Homeland Security, and I would refer to the recent GAO report looking at this. Certainly the GAO report highlights the importance of crime and violence and economic conditions in the home countries.
Let me just ask, has there been a dramatic increase in either crime or a dramatic reduction in economic conditions in Central America starting year 2012 that would be a kind of a trigger for that, be a catalyst for that type of enormous spike? I mean, I've got the murder rates, homicide rates per 100,000, and quite honestly, in most of these countries, they'd actually dropped from, we've gone from El Salvador in 2009, 71, 2010, 64, 2011, 70, 2012 was 43, 2013, 40. So again, I realize Central America is not America, and you've got a huge wage differential. There's certainly pull factors in that. But again, I'm looking at what caused that spike. So let me just say, I would say that nobody's really disputing that that's certainly a real possible cause right there. But let me get into some numbers here. Since 2009, from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, there have been over 100,000, 109,000 unaccompanied children coming to this country. Of the children coming in 2009, we returned about 30%. 2010, we returned about 22%. 2011, we returned about 24%. 2012, 12%. 2013, 6.2%. 2014, 2.7%, and as of 2015, about 3.8%. Now again, we can't really relate those return versus when they came in, but that's just the return versus the children coming to this country. So in all, we've returned about 5.7%, about 6,248 unaccompanied children, and we've had 109,000 come to this country illegally. Now, is that sending a signal to people in Central America that if, as an unaccompanied child, you come into America, you got a 95, 94.3% chance of being able to stay? Is that a disincentive for making that trip or an incentive for making that trip? Anybody want to answer that? I would say it's an incentive. Mr. Miller, there are currently, I think in your testimony you said about 6,800 final orders of removal that have been issued. So those are adjudicated cases. People have been ordered to be removed. Children have been ordered to be removed from this country. So far in fiscal year 2015, we've removed 569. Why aren't we removing the 6,800?
Senator, first, the data I have shows that so far this fiscal year, as of mid-June, we had removed about 1,500 unaccompanied children. In terms of working...
Okay, so 1,500 versus 6,800.
Yes, sir. As a police manager, I have to look at all of the cases that we have to work. And I can tell you that if I'm going to task my officers with going out after criminals that are at large in our community or going out after juveniles who are non-criminals in our community, I think it's good policing to go after the criminals. We face very dynamic environment in a number of jurisdictions that are no longer honoring ICE detainers. And so rather than my officers being able to go and pick up criminals, convicted criminals in a jail, we have to go out with teams and find these people in the community. That is very resource intensive, and if we have to prioritize those two populations, I think we're making appropriate prioritization, giving our policing responsibilities.
Well, as long as we're talking about criminals, on Sunday we learned that 32-year-old Catherine Steinle, was killed in San Francisco by an illegal immigrant who had 7 prior felony convictions. According to a ICE data provided to Senators Grassley and Flake from fiscal year 2010 through fiscal year 2014, 121 criminal aliens were released and have been subsequently charged with a homicide-related offense. What do you have to say about that lack of enforcement?
I don't think that the two are necessarily the larger data that we have been talking with your colleagues in the House side about. That represented a number of different reasons why those persons could no longer be detained. Many of those are a function of law. There are both circuit court decisions in the Ninth Circuit. There's also binding Supreme Court.
Tell me specifically, what is preventing us when we have people in this country illegally and they have had 7 prior felony convictions? Why aren't we able to deport those individuals?
In that particular case, our detainer was not honored.
Who didn't honor it?
San Francisco Sheriff's Department did not honor our detainer that we lodged.
So you have no legal authority to detain that person yourself? Or apprehend them and deport them?
In that particular case, that gentleman had an outstanding felony narcotics warrant, and we feel strongly that the BOP made the right decision in trying to resolve that criminal warrant before we were allowed to take further civil action.
What is DOP?
Bureau of Prisons.
Didn't make sense to me right there. So tell me what happened. That you seem to know a fair amount about that case. What happened in that case where that individual had 7 prior felony convictions, and he'd been released repeatedly, obviously, and now a young woman is dead? Why did that happen?
In that particular instance, he completed serving a federal sentence for illegal reentry after deportation by an aggravated felon. When he completed that sentence, records checks.
So let me start. Why didn't ICE pick him up immediately upon that and deport him? What is preventing us from doing just that? We've got him in custody. He serves his sentence. Why isn't ICE right there at the prison door escorting that person back to his country of origin?
As I said, there was an outstanding narcotics warrant, felony narcotics warrant, and Bureau of Prisons, as we would have done the same thing, we seek to resolve all criminal warrants before we go forward with removal. That has been our past practice for a number of years. We actually operate that within the criminal alien program as a matter of agency direction. The officers are to resolve outstanding felony criminal warrants before proceeding with removal.
So there's another criminal warrant, but he was released into general society to create a murder or to commit a murder. I mean, does that make any sense to you? Because I'll tell you, it doesn't make any sense to the American public. And that's the problem. What we're trying to grapple with here. That's the problem we need to solve. Senator, let me quick point out the message we're sending to children in Central America is 2.7% of them were returned from 2014. Even using Mr. Miller's updated numbers of 1,500, that's about 10%. So in other words, the message we're sending is if you get to America, 90% or more of you will be able to stay. That's the message. And from what my understanding is Mexico is doing a far better job of policing its southern border, increasing their apprehensions by 79%. I think that's probably the number one reason our numbers are down here, and that's a good thing. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Miller, I'm a little confused because earlier you just said that the children that are not, and that is true, by law, according to those memorandum, children coming in here now, they do not have the benefits of deferred action on childhood arrivals. But you said that, so they're priority, but in answer to my questions, you said that the priorities are really the criminals. So which is it? Are these removals of children coming in here now, or is that a priority or not?
It is a priority, but with most law enforcement agencies, they prioritize criminal actions or, the apprehension and removal of criminals higher than the apprehension.
It's not a top priority. Secretary Johnson, in front of a budget hearing, Appropriation Committee hearing, April 29, 2015, quote, he said, "You have to show the population in Central America that you are sending people back." That was the Secretary of Homeland Security. Okay, we got to show Central America that you're sending people back. Mr. Miller, does it send the signal? Are we showing people we're sending them back when we've literally when we're sending somewhere between 2.7 and maybe as many as 10% back. And again, let's really take a look at the number. From 2009, of unaccompanied children, 109,000 have come into this country. According to some of my figures, I'm not exactly sure what the real number is, but that's pretty close. We've returned a little over 6,000, which is about a 5.7% rate. So, I mean, I agree with Senator Peters. Deferred action on childhood arrivals does not legally apply to these children, but in reality, isn't that what really children in Central America are relying on? The reality of the situation is that if you get into America, you've got a very low percentage chance, very low probability of being returned. I mean, isn't that the reality? And let me just ask you the question this way. Do you believe we are, as Secretary Johnson said, are we showing the population of Central America that we are sending people back in any meaningful way?
I think across the broad spectrum of all the persons interdicted on the border, yes, we are. We've worked very effectively with the adult population. We continue to make strides with the family units, and we will work collaboratively with our partners here at the table that simply put, the juvenile process takes longer to mature. I don't have the data with me that shows the persons that have been removed when they were interdicted and when they entered into the court process. We see across the spectrum that by the time the cases mature, many of the people who have gone through this process and been adjudicated fully by the immigration court, they may have each reached the age of majority before their case matures. That's not something that any one member is at fault for. That is something that is the nature of the process. These children upon interdiction have due process rights, and we have to wait for those rights to mature. I can tell you that going forward, we will continue to utilize our efforts appropriately. I think it's still, I mean, I stand by my previous statement that it makes good sense as a police manager if I have limited resources and I'm faced with the task of going after criminals or going after non-criminal children. I think it's the appropriate choice to go after the criminals first.
Again, from my standpoint, I think we need to disincentivize children from making that dangerous journey. I think that's compassion. Mr. Greenberg, does HHS check the status, the immigration status, the legal status of sponsors of unaccompanied children that they turn unaccompanied children over to?
We do make inquiry of a potential sponsor as to their immigration status.
100% of the time?
So we make inquiry in all cases. In addition to that, for those cases that are subject to fingerprinting, we will get immigration information in the context of the fingerprint match.
So if you find somebody who's in this country illegally, do you still turn those unaccompanied children over to a illegal immigrant parent?
In the process of placing a child with a sponsor, we make inquiry about immigration status.
A simple yes or no answer. Do you turn unaccompanied children over to illegal immigrant parents?
We will place a child with an undocumented parent.
That you know is undocumented?
That's correct, yes.
Do you then notify either ICE or DHS about that fact?
We will provide the information about the location and the address of the sponsor at the time that we release the child.
Do you notify any agency that that individual is in this country illegally?
We will
again,
respond,
very simple question. Do you inform DHS or ICE that you have just placed a child with somebody in this country illegally?
We will respond to any inquiry we receive.
No, really, just answer the question. Do you tell DHS or ICE that you have just placed a child with somebody that you know is in this country illegally? Yes or no? Do you tell them that?
We don't affirmatively do so. We will provide the information.
That's a no then. Can you just say no? That's no. You don't inform ICE or DHS.
We will provide the information upon their request.
Do they ever ask you for it?
In some circumstances, I understand that they do.
Probably pretty rare. One question I have for you, and I'm not judging whether this is right or wrong, but in your testimony, you do state that children have the privilege of representation, but at no expense to the government. But then you're talking about we're doing requests for quotation on legal services. I mean, can you square that for me? I mean, I don't. If current law is that there can be no expense to the government, and yet we are issuing grants for people to provide legal representation. I mean, just how does that? I mean, how do you, I guess, get around the law?
Sure.
Which is basically what's happening, correct?
No, we're complying with the law, Senator. And we have a specific responsibility under the law to help children in receiving legal
So
representation.
there's a conflict in the law is what you're saying.
The-
So on the one hand, there's a law that says there can be no government expense utilized to provide legal representation, but if there's another part of the law that gives you the authority to have legal representation at government expense. I mean, is that basically what's happening?
So the law makes clear that we should be maximizing the use of pro bono resources, and we do seek to maximize the use of pro bono resources.
But you're also,
But we need to do more than that.
you're also granting money for legal, or certainly asking for requests and paying for legal representation, are you not?
That's correct. That's correct. And
So
we do
again,
have-
again, it's your testimony that says legal representation is supposed to be granted, but at no expense to government, and yet you're paying for it.
we're
Again, is that just a conflict in the law?
We do not believe it's a conflict in the law. We are following the requirements of the TVPRA. the
Okay, I
trafficking-
tell you what, it sounds like a real conflict in the law that we ought to
Well,
address.
and Senator, the law is clear that it says that we should be using pro bono to the maximum extent possible. That makes clear that if we are doing that, that we should be doing additional things beyond that.
Well, it looks like the law is clear in two different, in a conflicting manner. And on the one hand, at no expense to government, and then it's clear we should be spending money. So again, I think that's a conflict that we need to address. Mr. Osuna, real quick, what is the average time to adjudicate one of these claims? Do you have that stat at all? I mean, are we talking months? Are we talking years?
You're talking for
unaccompanied children.
Our commitment, Senator, is to have the initial hearing in 21 days, and we're hearing to that. We are adhering to that.
Okay, that's
timeline.
just the initial hearing. I'm
That's the
talking
initial
about
hearing, right.
adjudication to the
I don't have that
close.
number, and because these cases do take, as my colleagues have mentioned, do take a long time. Some cases have resulted already in removal orders because the child probably did not have a claim to
But
present.
a very low percentage of those.
6,800.
Very low percent.
So they can take a significant amount of time. I will say that legal representation does help because, for obvious reasons that we're.
You got a
talking with
lawyer
Senator
making
Peters,
sure that the person shows up.
Less fewer continuances, all that. So that does help in speeding up the court hearings, at least at the beginning of the process. But yes, they can take a long time. I don't have a number to give you in terms of the latest surge of children, but it is certainly a matter of months and not weeks.
Isn't it really more a matter of years?
It can't, well, it depends. I mean, it depends. If the child does apply for some sort of relief from removal that requires a transfer to USCIS, then it can.
With begging the indulgence of my ranking member here, Mr. Langlois is talking about a very low percentage of these UACs obtaining any kind of asylum, okay? But yet we have a very low percentage of people with orders to remove. So again, I don't see how we can, this has got to be a very, very lengthy process then. I mean, I don't see any, when you go back to 2009 and just see what a very low percentage of those people that have been returned, and the very low percentage in total of the 109,000, this has got to be a very lengthy process.
It can be a lengthy process, and it's not just asylum, Mr. Chairman, but also kids can also apply for special immigrant juvenile status, which is even more complicated because it involves the state court systems. And so, but that is the law that we have. That is the law that we work through. Again, I think that we certainly work through these cases as quickly as we can, consistent with due process, and I know my colleagues do as well.
I appreciate that. And again, I appreciate you're trying to comply with the laws, and I think that's what this committee is trying to lay bare is the conflict within the law, the incentives we create for people coming to this country illegally. We need to address those conflicts and those incentives. Senator Carper. Thank you, Senator Carper. And I'm going to use Senator Carper's fine example by allowing each of you to have opportunity to make one final comment. But before I do that, I do want to requote Secretary Johnson before that appropriation hearing on April 29, 2005. Quote, "You have to show the population in Central America that you are sending people back." To quote our ranking member, he frequently says, you have to find out what works and do more of that. Well, we have an example of what worked. In 2005, we were experiencing a real surge with Brazilian immigrants, 3 times higher than the previous year, 31,063. And as a result of that, in 2005, DHS Secretary Chertoff employed Operation Texas Hold'em. where they prioritized existing space, dedicated bed space, and began detaining and removing all of the illegal Brazilians that were apprehended using expedited removals. By the following year, the number of people coming in illegally from Brazil dropped from 31,063 to 1,460. So again, I think, you know, what this hearing, by the way, again, I just want to thank you all for your testimony. This has been very enlightening. Very complex problem, multiple root causes. You know, I certainly have my opinion in terms of what the primary root cause is, but what we found from your testimony, what we found from your answers to your questions is so much, and I think somebody here said broken immigration system. It is. I mean, that's a very valid acknowledgement. It's a broken system. It's convoluted. It's obviously within these 3 departments and 5 different agencies trying to grapple with this thing. It's not fully coordinated. Often there are conflicting laws. So I really do want to, you know, I'm pleased to hear that our ranking member used the word piecemeal reform. I realize this administration doesn't want to talk about that, but listen, we don't do comprehensive very well because it is complicated. These things aren't easy to deal with. So certainly what I asked Secretary Jay Johnson when he was before this committee was work with this committee. Let's identify these problems, these conflicts. And because quite honestly, the reality situation is we're not going to do comprehensive reform, not in the next 18 months. Even by Secretary Johnson's admission, we're not even going to have situational awareness of the border in the next 18 months. So let's take a look at the problems. Let's take a look at the conflicts. Let's look at the convoluted process. Let's try and fully coordinate this. Let's start making the incremental improvements. I come from a manufacturing background of continuous improvement. Root cause analysis. So let's look at the root causes of these individual little problems and working with you with your help, with your expertise. Again, I truly appreciate your service, and I understand that you're dealing with the laws we've got. That's what we have to deal with. But I think the only thing that's realistic that we can accomplish, at least in the next 18 months, is and let's not use piecemeal because that may have the wrong connotation. How about a step-by-step continuous improvement process? I think we have that attitude. If, you know, the ranking member is willing to work with me, you know, let's prioritize those individual problems that we can address and start fixing this on a step-by-step basis. But with that, let's start with Mr. I'm sorry, I don't have my notes and I can't read. Osuna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Harper, I would just...
Thank you, Mr. Langlois. Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony, for your thoughtful answers to our questions. I will have more questions for the record. In particular, we just got to get our arms around the information, the data, because you have to have that kind of data to really highlight, you know, where the problem areas and what you need to really address. So I want to work with all of your agencies to get that information. But this hearing record will remain open for 15 days until July 22nd at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and those additional questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.